Hey y'all, here are OS Reviews. In the past, we've checked out a couple of retro emulator handheld consoles, which are actually really fun. You're able to play back some of the classic arcade-style games, Game Boy, WonderSwan, SNES, as well as other kind of older PlayStation and Xbox console games as well. Today's product is an alternative to some of those handheld consoles. Instead of having an all-in-one device with the built-in processor and display, it requires an existing laptop, a computer running on Windows, for it to be usable. But benefits include if you want to use a larger display like your laptop, it might be a little bit more immersive versus a smaller handheld. If you're traveling with your laptop already, it's essentially a hard drive that you just connect by USB onto your computer, and then you're able to play back these games, leveraging the power, the graphics, and the CPU from your computer, of course. But as a result, this thing is also going to be a lot more cost effective. The Hyperbase L-Box Lite is the name, and this particular variant only sells for around $30 or so. It is technically a 500 gigabyte capacity hard drive, and inside we have over 3,700 titles on board, spanning various platforms, including, for example, Wii. The classic PlayStation games can also be found. With that being said, this particular model does lean a little bit more heavily towards console as opposed to handhelds. My understanding is you won't find any Game Boy titles on here as a result, nor you will find any, for instance, DS or PSP games, which is interesting. So if you are looking for more of the handheld console type games instead, you may have to look at an alternative variant which packs even more support, since again this is the Lite edition, which is going to be a little bit smaller in capacity. More specifically, here are all of the different platforms that it comes included with as far as emulators on the device are concerned. Sega Genesis, as well as Sony PlayStation, SNES is what we're talking about. Here's also a quick glimpse through some of the included titles in that 3,000 list, and overall it's not bad. It has a primary emphasis on US-based ROMs, but you will still find some occasional ones which also have variants for example, Japan. So the duplication isn't that bad, I would say. It is still primarily going to be in English, but you will still find a portion, I would say maybe 10% to 15% of that 3,700 list, which might be a little bit more other language variant ROMs, which is not quite as perfect as if the entire list was completely filled with English ROMs only. So just something to keep in mind, but not too bad considering this thing again is really low cost at only $30. The packaging here is quite simple. It just says game console, and on the inside here we have a smaller mini cardboard box that contains the actual kind of hard drive unit itself, along with a USB cable that plugs into the port here, and then just a standard USB 3.0 port Type A onto your laptop or desktop computer. Again, this thing is Windows only at the moment though, so that is something to keep in mind. Mac OS support unfortunately doesn't seem to be applicable out of the box. A little bit of a shame. Hopefully that's something that can change maybe in the future, but just do, again, keep that in mind. Also, it's not going to work with Chromebooks because the emulation software is an executable that is for Windows only, again, at the moment. Now, it looks like there is an LED light strip, but on this Lite version, this is just made out of plastic here. It doesn't actually glow in the dark. That would have been cool, but I think on some of the more premium models, which have even larger capacity drives, for example, 2TB, 5TB, those ones will have a little bit more of extra LED accents, but it is what it is. The drive itself is made out of polycarbonate plastic, but has a good weight to it. Doesn't feel too cheap, I would say. And then the very bottom here is completely plain, but it also comes with some 3M sticky foam pads if you want to attach it onto the back to prevent the drive from sliding around on the desk. And otherwise, we do get two wireless controllers as part of the packaging as well. Will require you to be plugging them into a USB port on your computer, so also keep that in mind. So if you're looking at a multiplayer game, you'll have a total of 3 USB ports occupied on your computer, one from the actual hard disk and then 2 for the nano receivers of the controllers. And these controllers take 2 AAA batteries. The quality isn't going to necessarily knock your socks off, but it's functional and relatively comfy as you're holding it in terms of the ergonomics. And we have just the classic kind of A, B, X, Y keys. We also have up, down arrow keys and also the thumbsticks, and the shoulder buttons do feel relatively clicky. There are LED lights there and also a manual power switch located at the bottom. Plugging into a USB drive, we're able to now see a quick user guide as well as kind of a quick tutorial video as well. And there is an install first folder that will give you a few drivers if you don't have DirectX. But if you have a relatively modern computer, I would say made in the late 2010s, 2020s, it's likely that it's already pre-installed already, so you don't really have to look at that. But if you need it, it's going to be present there. What you have to do then is just click on the Open Launchbox.exe folder, then just click on Launchbox, and that will then jump into the UI where you can start playing back the titles. The file directory here also includes some subfolders where technically the game data will get saved into, so it has the game state that you can then resume if you're playing back a longer title, as well as you can find technically which games are actually in the folders here as well, and even drag over additional games and ROMs. But if you're more of a novice and you just want to plug it in and start playing, you don't have to really tamper or mess around with any of those things. Just again, simply click on the launch program and then you're good to go. It will take about a minute or so for it to initialize. Bar here on the left will allow you to sort through by platform. The first one here is showing all games, so I can specifically choose on, say, Nintendo 64 versus Nintendo GameCube versus Wii versus Sega Genesis, so on and so forth, to find those relevant titles that are included in this drive. And it's a pretty intuitive and relatively elegant UI from Launchbox here. So for example, you can see a snippet of what system is being played, and when you click on a game, it will also show you a quick rating as well out of 5, how highly rated it is by community members. You can also find some thumb art down below here and also the information, including metadata for genre, as well as how it's rated, publisher info, when it was released. So personally, I think the layout is rather intuitive. It's easy to understand what you are looking at, and you can always read to find out more info. And so that's what I mean by the work has been done for you and you're kind of paying for that experience, because yes, technically you might be able to find some of these ROMs yourself. However, in order to build up your own library as well as get all the metadata tagged in a way that is readable as well as easy to navigate is what you are kind of paying for in this instance as well. And what's impressive is all of this is done in an offline manner. You don't have to be turning on Wi-Fi or be connected to Ethernet. It is all saved on the drive itself and doesn't require to occupy additional space on your computer's memory either. It's all just plug and play and you're ready to go. Alternatively, you can also adjust the search parameters. You can actually enter a title specifically that you want to look for, and you can also select on the drop down here to change from platform into, say, publisher, genre, as well as your favorites, for example, if you prefer that. And again, a lot of this metadata has been already pre-tagged, so you can more quickly find additional games here. If you don't want to be looking under a specific platform, you can easily also discover some titles using this method. But I would say it's a fair sampling that's kind of representative of the overall landscape. For instance, there are going to be more popular action and adventure, platform style games as compared to puzzle type games that are just going to be more relevant and more enjoyable. So you kind of expect those titles and genres to have a larger selection as a result. So it seems to be fair in terms of the overall selection that we have on board. You don't necessarily need a gaming computer with the fastest GPU, but you should also preferably not be connecting this thing to just an Atom or a Celeron based Windows computer either if you want a slightly better optimized playing experience. For example, you can even find, again, Wii as well as Nintendo Switch. So some of these titles will require you to have, as a result, more powerful hardware for it to run faster. It's completely dependent on the type of games that you are playing back. So the takeaway is, if you are primarily looking at only, let's say, Super Nintendo or really Sony PlayStation, Sega Genesis games as a result, you can probably get by with lower end hardware on your computer. But if you are trying to really play back some of the more graphically demanding games, you would technically want to have a faster computer as a result. Continuing on the point of this not being really a handheld emulation system, if we search for something like Pokemon, for example, which is primarily a more mobile or handheld style platform game, you'll see that the selection here is going to be more scarce. You'll still find some content from the franchise, but it's not really the major games, or rather the puzzle style ones for alternative console platforms like Nintendo 64, just to serve as an example. So what I mean by that is, again, if you're looking for handheld titles, or if you're really a Pokemon fan, let's say, then this is not going to be the variant that you are looking for. I will also point out that there is kind of a blurry line between what is considered retro, quote unquote, and so in that regard, I feel like there are certain categories included here, for example, under Windows, as well as Nintendo Switch, whether or not it should be present on a device like this, because those are by much newer franchises and platforms, and arguably we would really want this to only house older retro games which are harder to get your hands on in this day and age, and perhaps some of the copyright has also expired and elapsed as compared to really modern ones. So just for educational purposes, we'll kind of take a peek at what is in this category or bucket, but my personal opinion would just be kind of ignoring this section, and perhaps to kind of future revisions of products like this, perhaps even removing this section altogether and just expanding on the other retro platform categories by including even more games for those buckets instead. I think that would be a smarter choice, and also, in my personal opinion, make it more of a complete all-in-one retro-style emulation device, because as it is, again, this one only having console-style platforms, if you want to play some of the handheld ones, you have to switch onto another device for that, instead of it being truly all-in-one. Although, again, some of the larger capacity variants may have that, but it's not present on this lower-cost Lite edition. At least the selection in these buckets aren't going to be super expansive, although I suspect that's also because the newer a game is, inevitably, the larger storage space, memory, resources that it occupies. So these ones will probably take up more room as compared to some of the older style ROMs, which are going to be more compact. What you'll see is after clicking on play, it will then jump into the emulation interface. For example, the one for GameCube will just give you a full screen view, and everything will be maximized here, and it's loading back quite well. For the most part, again, if you have a mid-range computer, it will still be a pretty smooth overall frame rate, as you can tell here. So if we tap on Begin, some of the games you're able to play back directly using your keyboard as well. Other ones may want to leverage the controller. Alternatively, here is Lego Batman, and we have selected the Wii ROM instead. So this one is a little bit tricky because some of the motion type games for Nintendo Wii, of course, will not be really workable with just a regular arcade style controller, but you can get around with certain ones that are going to just take advantage of the D-pad maybe a little bit more, but that is also something just to quickly keep in mind. Still, it is impressive that these games can load back and play back quite well, even now on an x86 based, again, Windows computer. So that's more or less it as far as our quick hands-on review of the HyperBox Lite edition. And for what it is, if you want to leverage, again, the power of your existing laptop, your computer, this might be an interesting alternative to one of the all-in-one dedicated handheld consoles. For a more affordable cost, you are getting a larger selection of titles, primarily if you are looking for more console-style games, although, once again, handheld-style games are not going to be available on this particular variant. Still, it seems to work quite well in terms of the UI. Everything is well organized, and it's pretty easy to set up and start playing. Just, again, plug it into your computer, and you are pretty much all set and ready to go. You can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now, thanks for watching here at OS Reviews.